All right, so we've got another deep dive ready to go here. You all sent in some really, really thought-provoking articles about racial disparities in healthcare,
Hmm.
and specifically how Black patients are often undertreated for their pain.
Yeah.
And this is something that, I mean, we talk about a lot of stuff on this show. This
Right.
is something that needs to be talked about way more, so let's dive in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a crucial conversation.
It is. It really is. And we're starting with an excerpt from the AAMC, the Association of American Medical Colleges,
Huh.
and it's called "How We Fail Black Patients in Pain."
Hmm.
And the AAMC is a they're a well-respected organization, so when they talk, people listen.
Right.
And one of the things that just like jumped out at me at the very, very beginning was a statistic they cited from a 2016 study.
Okay.
Get this, half of medical students and residents that they surveyed endorsed at least one false belief about biological differences between Black and white people when it comes to pain.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that is a sobering statistic. And you know what's even more concerning is that these beliefs, they aren't just these outdated ideas from the past.
Right.
They're still circulating today.
I know. And they specifically call out these myths like Black people's nerve endings are less sensitive
Mm.
or that their skin is thicker. It's like, where is this coming from? You would think this would be like something from a history book.
Yeah.
To think that future doctors, people who are going to be treating us, are coming out of med school with these beliefs, it's scary. What does that say about how they're being trained?
It really raises some serious questions about the information that's being taught and the biases that may be embedded in medical training. And, these beliefs are rooted in a long and very, very painful history
Mm-hmm.
of racism and scientific racism.
Mm.
And this was used to justify atrocities like slavery.
Mm.
And it's horrifying to think that these ideas might still be shaping medical care today.
Oh yeah, and it's not just like a theoretical thing. I mean, this study shows a direct link between holding these false beliefs and providing inadequate pain treatment to Black patients.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. The research actually found that the trainees who believed that Black people weren't as sensitive to pain were less likely to properly address their pain.
Wow.
It's a clear illustration of how bias can impact clinical decisions.
And unfortunately, it's not just this one study, right? I mean, this is like a pattern that we see over and over again.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are numerous studies that highlight these very disparities. For example, there's a 2012 study that revealed a correlation between pediatricians' implicit racial biases and their pain management decisions.
Okay, so even when you like try to control for it, even in a simulation, this bias still creeps in.
Hmm.
What were the findings? Like what exactly did they see?
Well, they found that, in this simulated scenario, Black patients were less likely to receive appropriate pain medication compared to their white counterparts.
Wow.
And, it suggests that implicit bias can affect even the most, well-intentioned healthcare providers.
It's scary to think that something that's so unconscious can have such a huge impact on the care that people receive.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the disparities aren't limited to just individual studies.
Okay.
Um, a meta-analysis that examined 20 years of data revealed that Black patients were 22% less likely to receive any pain medication.
22%.
Yeah.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah, it's a huge discrepancy compared to white patients, and this is across various pain
It
conditions.
just makes you wonder how many people have just been suffering needlessly because of these biases.
It's a deeply concerning statistic, and it's really important to emphasize that these disparities aren't usually about, intentional acts of cruelty. Most healthcare providers, they don't consciously decide to undertreat patients based on their race.
Hmm.
But implicit bias, by its very nature, operates below the level of conscious awareness.
Right.
It's automatic, often in direct conflict with our stated beliefs,
Right.
and shaped by cultural messages and experiences that we've, absorbed throughout our lives.
Well, that's what makes it so hard to address, right? Like if we're not even aware of it, how do we even begin to change it?
That's the real challenge, right?
Yeah.
It requires a very conscious effort to acknowledge that we all have implicit biases,
Mm-hmm.
even if we don't, like to admit it.
They mentioned this implicit revolution just kind of in passing in the article.
Yeah.
What is that? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. The implicit revolution refers to this growing awareness of the power of the unconscious mind and its influence on our thoughts, our feelings, and ultimately our actions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really driven by research in fields like social psychology and neuroscience,
Okay.
which, have demonstrated how much of our mental processing actually occurs outside of our conscious awareness.
So it's like we're discovering this whole other part of our brains that we didn't even know was running the show.
Right.
Eh?
Exactly. Exactly. And one of the key revelations of this implicit revolution has been the discovery of implicit bias.
Okay.
We now understand that our unconscious associations can lead us to make these biased judgments and decisions,
Mm-hmm.
even when we consciously believe in equality and fairness.
So how does this all connect back to pain management?
Well, there's a 2019 study that I think really illustrates this connection.
Okay.
Um, in this study, white participants were shown images of faces
Mm-hmm.
experiencing pain, and they were asked to rate the intensity of the pain.
Okay.
The findings were really quite striking.
Well, what did they find?
Well, they found that the participants were more accurate and faster at recognizing pain on white faces compared to black faces.
Wow. So even something as basic as perceiving someone else's pain can be distorted by bias.
Precisely. Our unconscious biases can shape how we interpret, facial expressions, body language, and even verbal reports of pain. And remember, pain assessment is inherently subjective.
Mm.
There is no objective test to measure pain like we measure blood pressure or temperature.
Right.
And this subjectivity, it really opens the door for bias to seep into the process.
And this is especially true, I would think, when the cause of the pain isn't that obvious, right? Like if there's no, visible injury or some clear-cut diagnosis.
You're exactly right. The meta-analysis that we mentioned earlier found that the largest disparities in pain treatment were for conditions like back pain, migraines, abdominal pain.
Okay.
These are conditions where clinical judgment plays a much more significant role.
Right, because it's not like as clear what's causing it.
Exactly.
Right.
Because the source of the pain may not be readily apparent.
So the less objective the pain is, the more likely it is that bias is going to affect how it's perceived and treated.
Precisely. And that's really where the danger lies. When doctors have to rely more heavily on their own interpretations and subjective assessments,
Right.
implicit bias can have a significant impact on their decisions.
And it's not just about individual biases, though, right? I mean, there are bigger things at play here.
Absolutely. We can't ignore the influence of cultural stereotypes and narratives that contribute to these disparities.
Like how the media often portrays Black people as being, more likely to abuse drugs or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. These stereotypes can make healthcare providers more hesitant to prescribe pain medication
Right.
to Black patients, even when it's medically appropriate,
Right.
out of fear that they might, become addicted.
It's almost like these biases create this vicious cycle, right? Where societal stereotypes feed into implicit bias, which then leads to disparities in treatment, which further reinforces those stereotypes.
Right.
It's frustrating.
It is frustrating. It's a very complex problem. But the good news is that there are steps that we can take to address this.
Okay, so let's talk about solutions then. The AAMC article, they outlined several recommendations. So where do we even begin to tackle a problem that's so deeply rooted in our society?
Well, the first step is acknowledging the problem. We need to move beyond simply raising awareness
Right.
and start implementing concrete solutions.
So it's not enough to just talk about it.
No,
we
no.
have to do something.
Exactly. And the AAMC article outlines some practical strategies that can make a real difference. One of the most crucial steps is data collection.
Okay.
Healthcare systems, they need to track pain management data meticulously, breaking it down by race, gender, insurance status, and other relevant factors.
So we need to see it in black and white, so to speak. Like if the data is there, it's harder to ignore.
Exactly. Exactly. Hard data can be a very, very powerful tool for driving change. It allows us to identify specific areas where disparities exist, understand the magnitude of these disparities, and measure the effectiveness of interventions.
But data alone isn't going to solve the problem of implicit bias.
Right.
Right. I mean, how do you address something that's so deeply ingrained and often operating outside of our conscious awareness?
Yeah, that's where tools like the implicit association test or the IAT come in.
Okay.
The IAT is designed to measure implicit biases by assessing our automatic associations between different concepts like race and pain sensitivity.
I've heard of that. It's supposed to be pretty eye-opening.
It can be. Taking the IAT can be a very uncomfortable experience because it forces us to confront biases we might not even know we have,
Right.
but it's an important step
Yeah.
in understanding how implicit bias can influence our perceptions and our behaviors.
So it's about shining a light on those parts of our minds that we might not want to look at.
Exactly. Awareness is the first step toward change. And once we are aware of our biases, we can start to develop strategies for mitigating their impact.
So what kind of strategies are we talking about?
Well, there are a number of things we can do. One approach is to consciously expose ourselves to counter-stereotypical examples.
Okay.
For instance, if you're a healthcare provider, you might make an effort to read stories about Black patients who've, successfully managed their pain.
Mm-hmm.
Or seek out mentors from diverse backgrounds.
So it's about challenging those ingrained associations by introducing like new information, new experiences.
Exactly. And another important strategy is perspective taking.
Okay.
Before making a decision about a patient's pain management, take a moment to try to see the situation from their point of view. Consider their individual circumstances, their cultural background, and any past experiences they might have had with the healthcare system.
So it's like really trying to understand the individual and not just making assumptions.
Precisely.
Right.
And on a broader level, we need to advocate for systemic changes within healthcare institutions.
So what are we talking about here? Like what kind of changes?
Well, the AAMC article, it highlights the importance of standardized protocols for pain assessment and treatment.
Okay.
Clear guidelines can help to reduce the influence of individual bias by providing objective criteria for decision-making.
So it's like taking some of the subjectivity out of it.
Exactly. When doctors have, clear guidelines to follow, they're less likely to rely on gut feelings.
Right.
Or unconscious biases.
That's a good point. It's almost like it's like a safety net, right? Like a to catch those moments where bias might creep in.
Yeah, precisely. And standardized protocols can also help to ensure that all patients, regardless of their race or background, receive consistent and equitable care.
So it's not just about mitigating bias, it's also about promoting fairness.
Exactly. And another important system level change is increased diversity in the healthcare workforce.
That makes sense. If we have more doctors and nurses from different backgrounds, it's more likely that patients are going to encounter providers who understand them.
Absolutely. And a more diverse workforce can also help to challenge biases and promote cultural sensitivity within healthcare institutions.
It sounds like there's a lot of work to do on like an individual level and like a system level, But it also feels like there's a lot of hope too.
There is hope. The fact that we're having this conversation, that there's growing awareness of these issues, that researchers are developing new tools and strategies to address them, it's a sign of progress.
Yeah, it feels like we're on the cusp of a real shift in how we think about pain management and healthcare equity.
I agree. And it's important to remember that this is an ongoing journey. It requires sustained effort, vigilance, and a commitment to continuous improvement.
That's well said. This deep dive has given me a lot to think about. I'm curious, what's one thing that's really stood out to you from all of this?
For me, the most fascinating aspect is the research into objective measures of pain.
Okay.
The idea that we might one day have a blood test or a brain scan that can accurately measure pain intensity. I mean, it's incredibly exciting.
That would be revolutionary.
It would.
Imagine if we could measure pain as easily as we measure temperature or blood pressure.
Exactly.
It would change everything.
It would transform pain management as we know it.
Yeah.
And importantly, it could help to level the playing field.
Right.
Ensuring that all patients receive appropriate care regardless of their background or how they express their pain.
It would take so much of that subjectivity out of the equation.
Exactly.
Which is, where we see so much of the bias right now.
Exactly. Of course, these technologies are still in the very early stages of development.
Right.
And there are, ethical considerations to address, but the possibilities are truly remarkable.
It's almost like we're on the verge of a whole new way of understanding pain.
I agree. And it's amazing how this conversation about racial disparities in pain management has brought us to this point.
Yeah.
It highlights how addressing inequities often leads to innovations that benefit everyone.
It's a good reminder that progress in one area can have these like ripple effects across the entire system.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it gives us hope that we can create a future where pain management is truly equitable and effective for everyone.
Hmm.
So we've done a deep dive in every sense of the word today.
We have.
We've explored, this really difficult reality of racial disparities in pain management, unpacked the complexities of implicit bias, and even glimpsed into a future where objective pain measures could really transform the field.
Absolutely. And I hope this deep dive has given you, our listener, a deeper understanding of these critical issues and inspired you to be a part of the solution.
Because we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable healthcare system.
They do.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final thought. What will you do with the knowledge you've gained today? Will you have conversations with your friends and family about these issues? Will you support organizations that are working to address healthcare inequities? Will you be more mindful of your own biases?
Yeah.
Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to creating positive change.
It can.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Absolutely.
See you next time.
Yeah.